There was once a darning needle who thought herself so fine that she believed she was an embroidery needle. "Take great care to hold me tight," said the darning needle to the fingers who were holding her. "Don't let me fall. If I once fall on the ground, I shall never be found again. I am so fine." "It is all right," said the fingers, seizing her round the waist. "Look, I am coming with my train," said the darning needle as she drew a long thread after her, but there was no knot at the end of the thread. The fingers were using the needle on the cook's shoe. The upper leather was unstitched and had to be sewn together. "This is common work," said the darning needle. "I shall never get through it. I am breaking. I am breaking." And in fact, she did break. "Didn't I tell you so?" said the darning needle. "I am too fine. Now she is good for nothing," said the fingers. But they had to hold her tight while the cook dropped some sealing wax on the needle and stuck it in the front of her dress. "Now I am a breastpin," said the darning needle. "I always knew I should be promoted. When one is something, one will become something." And she laughed to herself. You can never see when a darning needle is laughing. Then she sat up as proudly as if she were in a state-coach and looked all round her. "May I be allowed to ask if you are gold?" she said to her neighbour, the pin. "You have a very nice appearance and a peculiar head, but it is too small. You must take pains to make it grow, for it is not everyone who has a head of sealing wax." And so saying, the darning needle raised herself up so proudly that she fell out of the dress, right into the sink which the cook was rinsing out. "Now I am off on my travels," said the darning needle. "I do hope I shan't get lost." She did indeed get lost. "I am too fine for this world," said she as she lay in the gutter, "but I know who I am, and that is always a little satisfaction." And the darning needle kept her proud bearing and did not lose her good temper. All kinds of things swam over her, shavings, bits of straw, and scraps of old newspapers. "Just look how they sail along," said the darning needle. "They don't know what is underneath them. Here I am sticking fast. There goes a shaving, thinking of nothing in the world but of itself, a mere chip. There goes a straw. Well, how it does twist and twirl, to be sure. Don't think so much about yourself, or you will be knocked against a stone. There floats a bit of newspaper. What is written on it is long ago forgotten, and yet how proud it is. I am sitting patient and quiet. I know who I am, and that is enough for me." One day something thick lay near her, which glittered so brightly that the darning needle thought it must be a diamond. But it was a bit of bottle glass, and because it sparkled, the darning needle spoke to it and gave herself out as a breastpin. "No doubt you are a diamond?" "Yes, something of that kind." And each believed that the other was something very costly, and they both said how very proud the world must be of them. "I have come from a lady's work-box," said Darning Needle, "and this lady was a cook. She had 5 fingers on each hand. Anything so proud as these fingers I have never seen. And yet they were only there to take me out of the work-box and to put me back again." "Were they of noble birth, then?" asked the bit of bottle-glass. "Of noble birth," said the Darning Needle. "No, indeed, but proud. They were 5 brothers, all called Fingers. They held themselves proudly one against the other, although they were of different sizes. The outside one, the thumb, was short and fat. He was outside the rank, and had only one bend in his back, and could only make one bow. But he said that if he were cut off from a man, that he was no longer any use as a soldier. Dip into everything. The second finger dipped into sweet things as well as sour things, pointed to the sun and the moon, and guided the pen when they wrote. Longman, the third, looked at the others over his shoulder. Goldband, the fourth, had a gold sash round his waist, and little Playman did nothing at all, and was the more proud. There was too much ostentation, and so I came away. And now we are sitting and shining here, said the bit of bottle glass. At that moment more water came into the gutter. It streamed over the edges and washed the bit of bottle glass away. "Ah, now he has been promoted," said the Darning Needle. "I remain here. I am too fine. But that is my pride, which is a sign of respectability." And she sat there very proudly, thinking lofty thoughts. "I really believe I must have been born a sunbeam. I am so fine. It seems to me as if the sunbeams were always looking under the water for me. Ah, I am so fine that my own mother cannot find me. If I had my old eye which broke off, I believe I could weep, but I can't. It is not fine to weep. One day, 2 street urchins were playing and wading in the gutter, picking up old nails, pennies, and such things. It was rather dirty work, but it was a great delight to them. "Oh, oh!" cried out one, as he pricked himself with the Darning Needle. "He is a fine fellow, though." "I am not a fellow. I am a young lady," said the Darning Needle, but no one heard. The sealing wax had gone, and she had become quite black, but black makes one look very slim, and so she thought she was even finer than before. "Here comes an eggshell sailing along," said the boys, and they stuck the Darning Needle into the eggshell. "The walls white, and I black. What a pretty contrast it makes," said the Darning Needle. "Now I can be seen to advantage. If only I am not seasick, I should give myself up for lost." But she was not seasick, and did not give herself up. It is a good thing to be steeled against seasickness. Here one has indeed an advantage over man. Now my qualms are over. The finer one is, the more one can beat. "Crack," said the eggshell as a wagon wheel went over it. "Oh, how it presses," said the Darning Needle. "I shall indeed be seasick now. I am breaking." But she did not break, although the wagon wheel went over her. She lay there at full length, and there she may lie. Many years ago there lived a king who was twice married. His first wife, a good and beautiful woman, died at the birth of her little son, and the king, her husband, was so overwhelmed with grief at her loss that his only comfort was in the sight of his heir. When the time for the young prince's christening came, the king chose as godmother a neighboring princess, so celebrated for her wisdom and goodness that she was commonly called the Good Queen. She named the baby Alphege, and from that moment took him to her heart. Time wipes away the greatest griefs, and after 2 or 3 years the king married again. His second wife was a princess of undeniable beauty, but by no means of so amiable a disposition as the first queen. In due time a second prince was born, and the queen was devoured with rage at the thought that Prince Alphege came between her son and the throne. She took care, however, to conceal her jealous feelings from the king. At length she could control herself no longer, so she sent a trusty servant to her old and faithful friend, the Fairy of the Mountain, to beg her to devise some means by which she might get rid of her stepson. The fairy replied that, much as she desired to be agreeable to the queen in every way, it was impossible for her to attempt anything against the young prince, who was under the protection of some greater power than her own. The good queen, on her side, watched carefully over her godson. She was obliged to do so from a distance, her own country being a remote one, but she was well informed of all that went on and knew all about the queen's wicked designs. She therefore sent the prince a large and splendid ruby, with injunctions to wear it night and day, as it would protect him from all attacks, but added that the talisman only retained its power as long as the prince remained within his father's dominions. The wicked queen, knowing this, made every attempt to get the prince out of the country, but her efforts failed, till one day accident did what she was unable to accomplish. The king had an only sister who was deeply attached to him, and who was married to the sovereign of a distant country. She had always kept up a close correspondence with her brother, and the accounts she heard of Prince Alphege made her long to become acquainted with so charming a nephew. She entreated the king to allow the prince to visit her, and after some hesitation, which was overruled by his wife, he finally consented. Prince Alphege was at this time 14 years old, and the handsomest and most engaging youth imaginable. In his infancy, he had been placed in the charge of one of the great ladies of the court, who, according to the prevailing custom, acted first as his head nurse and then as his governess. When he outgrew her care, her husband was appointed as his tutor and governor, so that he had never been separated from this excellent couple, who loved him as tenderly as they did their only daughter Zaida, and were warmly loved by him in return. When the prince set forth on his travels, it was but natural that this devoted couple should accompany him, and accordingly he started with them and attended by a numerous retinue. For some time he travelled through his father's dominions, and all went well. But soon after passing the frontier, they had to cross a desert plain under a burning sun. They were glad to take shelter under a group of trees near, and here the prince complained of burning thirst. Luckily, a tiny stream ran close by, and some water was soon procured. But no sooner had he tasted it than he sprang from his carriage and disappeared in a moment. In vain did his anxious followers seek for him. He was nowhere to be found. As they were hunting and shouting through the trees, a black monkey suddenly appeared on a point of rock and said, "Poor sorrowing people, you are seeking your prince in vain. Return to your own country, and know that he will not be restored to you till you have for some time failed to recognize him." With these words he vanished, leaving the courtiers sadly perplexed. But as all their efforts to find the prince were useless, they had no choice but to go home, bringing with them the sad news, which so greatly distressed the king that he fell ill and died not long after. The queen, whose ambition was boundless, was delighted to see the crown on her son's head, and to have the power in her own hands. Her hard rule made her very unpopular, and it was commonly believed that she had made away with Prince Alphege. Indeed, had the king her son not been deservedly beloved, a revolution would certainly have arisen. Meantime, the former governess of the unfortunate Alphege, who had lost her husband soon after the king's death, retired to her own house with her daughter. Ku grew up a lovely and most lovable girl, and both continued to mourn the loss of their dear prince. The young king was devoted to hunting, and often indulged in his favourite pastime, attended by the noblest youths in his kingdom. One day, after a long morning's chase, he stopped to rest near a brook in the shade of a little wood, where a splendid tent had been prepared for him. Whilst at luncheon, he suddenly spied a little monkey of the brightest green, sitting on a tree and gazing so tenderly at him that he felt quite moved. He forbade his courtiers to frighten it, and the monkey, noticing how much attention was being paid him, sprang from bough to bough, and at length gradually approached the king. Ku offered him some food. The monkey took it very daintily and finally came to the table. The king took him on his knees and, delighted with his capture, brought him home with him. He would trust no one else with its care, and the whole court soon talked of nothing but the pretty green monkey. One morning, as Prince Alphege's governess and her daughter were alone together, the little monkey sprang in through an open window. He had escaped from the palace, and his manners were so gentle and caressing that Zaida and her mother soon got over the first fright he had given them. He had spent some time with them and quite won their hearts by his insinuating ways, when the king discovered where he was and sent to fetch him back. But the monkey made such piteous cries and seemed so unhappy when anyone attempted to catch him that the two ladies begged the king to leave him a little longer with them, to which he consented. One evening, as they sat by the fountain in the garden, the little monkey kept gazing at Zada with such sad and loving eyes that she and her mother could not think what to make of it. And they were still more surprised when they saw big tears rolling down his cheeks. Next day, both mother and daughter were sitting in a jessamine bower in the garden, and they began to talk of the green monkey and his strange ways. The mother said, "My dear child, I can no longer hide my feelings from you. I cannot get the thought out of my mind that the green monkey is no other than our beloved Prince Alphege, transformed in this strange fashion. I know the idea sounds wild, but I cannot get it out of my heart, and it leaves me no peace." As she spoke, she glanced up, and there sat the little monkey, whose tears and gestures seemed to confirm her words. The following night, the elder lady dreamt that she saw the good queen, who said, "Do not weep any longer, but follow my directions. Go into your garden and lift up the little marble slab at the foot of the great myrtle tree. You will find beneath it a crystal vase filled with a bright green liquid. Take it with you and place the thing which is at present most in your thoughts into a bath filled with roses and rub it well with the green liquid." At these words, the sleeper awoke and lost no time in rising and hurrying to the garden, where she found all as the good queen had described. Then she hastened to rouse her daughter, and together they prepared the bath, for they would not let their women know what they were about. Zada gathered quantities of roses, and when all was ready, they put the monkey into a large jasper bath, where the mother rubbed him all over with the green liquid. Their suspense was not long, for suddenly the monkey skin dropped off, and there stood Prince Alphege, the handsomest and most charming of men. The joy of such a meeting was beyond words. After a time, the ladies begged the prince to relate his adventures, and he told them of all his sufferings in the desert when he was first transformed. His only comfort had been in visits from the good queen, who had at length put him in the way of meeting his brother. Several days were spent in these interesting conversations, but at length Zada's mother began to think of the best means for placing the prince on the throne, which was his by right. The queen on her side was feeling very anxious. She had felt sure from the first that her son's pet monkey was no other than Prince Alphege, and she longed to put an end to him. Her suspicions were confirmed by the fairy of the mountain, and she hastened in tears to the king, her son. "I am informed," she cried, "that some ill-disposed people have raised up an impostor in the hopes of dethroning you. You must at once have him put to death." The king, who was very brave, assured the queen that he would soon punish the conspirators. He made careful inquiries into the matter, and thought it hardly probable that a quiet widow and a young girl would think of attempting anything of the nature of a revolution. He determined to go and see them, and to find out the truth for himself. So one night, without saying anything to the queen or his ministers, he set out for the palace where the two ladies lived, attended only by a small band of followers. The two ladies were at the moment deep in conversation with Prince Alphege, and hearing a knocking so late at night, begged him to keep out of sight for a time. What was their surprise when the door was opened to see the king and his suite. "I know," said the king, "that you are plotting against my crown and person, and I have come to have an explanation with you." As she was about to answer, Prince Alphege, who had heard all, came forward and said, "It is from me you must ask an explanation, brother." He spoke with such grace and dignity that everyone gazed at him with mute surprise. At length the king, recovering from his astonishment at recognizing the brother who had been lost some years before, exclaimed, "Yes, "You are indeed my brother, and now that I have found you, take the throne to which I have no longer a right." So saying, he respectfully kissed the prince's hand. Alphege threw himself into his arms, and the brothers hastened to the royal palace, where in the presence of the entire court he received the crown from his brother's hand. To clear away any possible doubt, he showed the ruby which the good queen had given him in his childhood. As they were gazing at it, it suddenly split with a loud noise, and at the same moment the wicked queen expired. King Alphege lost no time in marrying his dear and lovely Zaida, and his joy was complete when the good queen appeared at his wedding. She assured him that the fairy of the mountain had henceforth lost all power over him, and after spending some time with the young couple and bestowing the most costly presents on them, she retired to her own country. King Alphege insisted on his brother sharing his throne, and they all lived to a good old age, universally beloved and admired. Fairer than a fairy. Once there lived a king who had no children for many years after his marriage. At length heaven granted him a daughter of such remarkable beauty that he could think of no name so appropriate for her as fairer than a fairy. It never occurred to the good-natured monarch that such a name was certain to call down the hatred and jealousy of the fairies in a body on the child. But this was what happened. No sooner had they heard of this presumptuous name than they resolved to gain possession of her who bore it, and either to torment her cruelly, or at least to conceal her from the eyes of all men. The eldest of their tribe was entrusted to carry out their revenge. This fairy was named Lagree. She was so old that she only had one eye and one tooth left, and even these poor remains she had to keep all night in a strengthening liquid. She was also so spiteful that she gladly devoted all her time to carrying out all the mean or ill-natured tricks of the whole body of fairies. With her large experience, added to her native spite, she found but little difficulty in carrying off fairer than a fairy. The poor child, who was only 7 years old, nearly died of fear on finding herself in the power of this hideous creature. However, when after an hour's journey underground she found herself in a splendid palace with lovely gardens, she felt a little reassured, and was further cheered when she discovered that her pet cat and dog had followed her. The old fairy led her to a pretty room which she said should be hers, at the same time giving her the strictest orders never to let out the fire which was burning brightly in the grate. She then gave 2 glass bottles into the princess's charge. Desiring her to take the greatest care of them, and having enforced her orders with the most awful threats in case of disobedience, she vanished, leaving the little girl at liberty to explore the palace and grounds, and a good deal relieved at having only 2 apparently easy tasks set her. Several years passed, during which time the princess grew accustomed to her lonely life, obeyed the fairy's orders, and by degrees forgot all about the court of the king her father. One day, whilst passing near a fountain in the garden, she noticed that the sun's rays fell on the water in such a manner as to produce a brilliant rainbow. She stood still to admire it when, to her great surprise, she heard a voice addressing her which seemed to come from the centre of its rays. The voice was that of a young man, and its sweetness of tone and the agreeable things it uttered led one to infer that its owner must be equally charming. But this had to be a mere matter of fancy, for no one was visible. The beautiful rainbow informed Fairer than a fairy that he was young, the son of a powerful king, and that the fairy, Lagree, who owed his parents a grudge, had revenged herself by depriving him of his natural shape for some years, that she had imprisoned him in the palace, where he had found his confinement hard to bear for some time, but now he owned He no longer sighed for freedom, since he had seen and learned to love fairer than a fairy. He added many other tender speeches to this declaration, and the princess, to whom such remarks were a new experience, could not help feeling pleased and touched by his attentions. The prince could only appear or speak under the form of a rainbow, and it was therefore necessary that the sun should shine on water so as to enable the rays to form themselves. Fairer than a fairy lost no moment in which she could meet her lover, and they enjoyed many long and interesting interviews. One day, however, their conversation became so absorbing and time passed so quickly that the princess forgot to attend to the fire, and it went out. L'Agly, on her return, soon found out the neglect and seemed only too pleased to have the opportunity of showing her spite to her lovely prisoner. She ordered Fairer than a Fairy to start next day at dawn to ask Locrinos for fire with which to relight the one she had allowed to go out. Now this Locrinos was a cruel monster who devoured everyone he came across, and especially enjoyed a chance of catching and eating any young girls. Our heroine obeyed with great sweetness, and without having been able to take leave of her lover, she set off to go to Locrinos as to certain death. As she was crossing a wood, a bird sang to her to pick up a shining pebble, which she would find in a fountain close by, and to use it when needed. She took the bird's advice, and in due time arrived at the house of Locrinos. Luckily, she only found his wife at home, who was much struck by the princess's youth and beauty and sweet gentle manners, and still further impressed by the present of the shining pebble. She readily let Fairer than a Fairy have the fire, and in return for the stone she gave her another, which, she said, might prove useful some day. Then she sent her away without doing her any harm. L'Agly was as much surprised as displeased at the happy result of this expedition, and Fairer than a fairy waited anxiously for an opportunity of meeting Prince Rainbow and telling him her adventures. She found, however, that he had already been told all about them by a fairy who protected him, and to whom he was related. The dread of fresh dangers to his beloved princess made him devise some more convenient way of meeting than by the garden fountain, and fairer than a fairy carried out his plan daily with entire success. Every morning she placed a large basin full of water on her windowsill, and as soon as the sun's rays fell on the water, the rainbow appeared as clearly as it had ever done in the fountain. By this means they were able to meet without losing sight of the fire or of the 2 bottles in which the old fairy kept her eye and her tooth at night. And for some time the lovers enjoyed every hour of sunshine together. One day, Prince Rainbow appeared in the depths of woe. He had just heard that he was to be banished from this lovely spot, but he had no idea where he was to go. The poor young couple were in despair, and only parted with the last ray of sunshine and in hopes of meeting next morning. Alas! Next day was dark and gloomy, and it was only late in the afternoon that the sun broke through the clouds for a few minutes. Fairer than a fairy eagerly ran to the window, but in her haste she upset the basin and spilt all the water with which she had carefully filled it overnight. No other water was at hand except that in the 2 bottles. It was the only chance of seeing her lover before they were separated, and she did not hesitate to break the bottle and pour their contents into the basin, when the rainbow appeared at once. Their farewells were full of tenderness. The prince made the most ardent and sincere protestations, and promised to neglect nothing which might help to deliver his dear Fairer than a Fairy from her captivity, and implored her to consent to their marriage as soon as they should both be free. The princess, on her side, vowed to have no other husband, and declared herself willing to brave death itself in order to rejoin him. They were not allowed much time for their adieus. The rainbow vanished, and the princess, resolved to run all risks, started off at once, taking nothing with her but her dog, her cat, a sprig of myrtle, and the stone which the wife of Locrinos gave her. When Legree became aware of her prisoner's flight, she was furious and set off at full speed in pursuit. She overtook her just as the poor girl, overcome by fatigue, had lain down to rest in a cave which the stone had formed itself into to shelter her. The little dog, who was watching her mistress, promptly flew at Legree and bit her so severely that she stumbled against a corner of the cave and broke off her only tooth. Before she had recovered from the pain and rage this caused her, the princess had time to escape and was some way on her road. Fear gave her strength for some time, but at last she could go no further and sank down to rest. As she did so, the sprig of myrtle she carried touched the ground, and immediately a green and shady bower sprang up round her, in which she hoped to sleep in peace. But Legree had not given up her pursuit, and arrived just as fairer than a fairy had fallen fast asleep. This time she made sure of catching her victim, but the cat spied her out, and, springing from one of the boughs of the arbour, she flew at Legree's face and tore out her only eye, thus delivering the princess for ever from her persecutor. One might have thought that all would now be well, but no sooner had Legree been put to fight than our heroine was overwhelmed with hunger and thirst. She felt as though she should certainly expire, and it was with some difficulty that she dragged herself as far as a pretty little green and white house, which stood at no great distance. Here she was received by a beautiful lady dressed in green and white to match the house, which apparently belonged to her, and of which she seemed the only inhabitant. She greeted the fainting princess most kindly, gave her an excellent supper, and after a long night's rest in a delightful bed, told her that after many troubles she should finally attain her desire. As the green and white lady took leave of the princess, she gave her a nut, desiring her only to open it in the most urgent need. After a long and tiring journey, fairer than a fairy was once more received in a house, and by a lady exactly like the one she had quitted. Here again she received a present with the same injunctions, but instead of a nut, this lady gave her a golden pomegranate. The mournful princess had to continue her weary way, and after many troubles and hardships, she again found rest and shelter in a third house exactly similar to the two others. These houses belonged to three sisters, all endowed with fairy gifts, and all so alike in mind and person that they wished their houses and garments to be equally alike. Their occupation consisted in helping those in misfortune, and they were as gentle and benevolent as Legree had been, cruel and spiteful. The third fairy comforted the poor traveller, begged her not to lose heart, and assured her that her troubles should be rewarded. She accompanied her advice by the gift of a crystal-smelling bottle, with strict orders only to open it in case of urgent need. Fairer than. A fairy thanked her warmly and resumed her way, cheered by pleasant thoughts. After a time her road led through a wood full of soft airs and sweet odours, and before she had gone 100 yards, she saw a wonderful silver castle, suspended by strong silver chains to 4 of the largest trees. It was so perfectly hung that a gentle breeze rocked it sufficiently to send you pleasantly to sleep. Fairer than. A fairy felt a strong desire to enter this castle, but besides being hung a little above the ground, there seemed to be neither doors nor windows. She had no doubt, though really I cannot think why, that the moment had come in which to use the nut which had been given her. She opened it, and out came a diminutive hall porter at whose belt hung a tiny chain, at the end of which was a golden key, half as long as the smallest pin you ever saw. The princess climbed up one of the silver chains, holding in her hand the little porter who, in spite of his minute size, opened a secret door with his golden key and let her in. She entered a magnificent room which appeared to occupy the entire castle, and which was lighted by gold and jeweled stars in the ceiling. In the midst of this room stood a couch, draped with curtains of all the colors of the rainbow, and suspended by golden cords so that it swayed with the castle in a manner which rocked its occupant delightfully to sleep. On this elegant couch lay Prince Rainbow, looking more beautiful than ever, and sunk in profound slumber, in which he had been held ever since his disappearance. Fairy. Then a fairy, who now saw him for the first time in his real shape, hardly dared to gaze at him, fearing lest his appearance might not be in keeping with the voice and language which had won her heart. At the same time, she could not help feeling rather hurt at the apparent indifference with which she was received. She related all the dangers and difficulties she had gone through, and though she repeated the story 20 times in a loud, clear voice, the prince slept on and took no heed. She then had recourse to the golden pomegranate, and on opening it found that all the seeds were as many little violins which flew up in the vaulted roof, and at once began playing melodiously. The prince was not completely roused, but he opened his eyes a little and looked all the handsomer. Impatient at not being recognized, fairer than? A fairy now drew out her third present, and on opening the crystal scent bottle, a little siren flew out, who silenced the violins, and then sang close to the prince's ear. The story of all his lady love had suffered in her search for him. She added some gentle reproaches to her tale, but before she had got far, he was wide awake and transported with joy threw himself at the princess's feet. At the same moment, the walls of the room expanded and opened out, revealing a golden throne covered with jewels. A magnificent court now began to assemble, and at the same time, several elegant carriages filled with ladies in magnificent dresses drove up. In the first and most splendid of these carriages sat Prince Rainbow's mother. She fondly embraced her son, after which she informed him that his father had been dead for some years, that the anger of the fairies was at length appeased, and that he might return in peace to reign over his people, who were longing for his presence. The court received the new king with joyful acclamations which would have delighted him at any other time, but all his thoughts were full of fairer than a fairy. He was just about to present her to his mother and the court, feeling sure that her charms would win all hearts, when the 3 green and white sisters appeared. They declared the secret of fairy, then a fairy's royal birth, and the queen, taking the 2 lovers in her carriage, set off with them for the capital of the kingdom. Here they were received with tumultuous joy. The wedding was celebrated without delay, and succeeding years diminished neither the virtues, beauty, nor the mutual affection of King Rainbow and his queen, fairer than a fairy. Hermod and Hadvor. Once upon a time there were a king and a queen who had an only daughter, called Hadvor, who was fair and beautiful, and being an only child, was heir to the kingdom. The king and queen had also a foster son named Hermod, who was just about the same age as Hadvor and was good-looking, as well as clever at most things. Hermod and Hadvor often played together while they were children, and liked each other so much that while they were still young, they secretly plighted their troth to each other. As time went on, the queen fell sick, and, suspecting that it was her last illness, sent for the king to come to her. When he came, she told him that she had no long time to live, and therefore wished to ask one thing of him, which was, that if he married another wife, he should promise to take no other one than the Queen of Hetland the Good. The king gave the promise, and thereafter the queen died. Time went past, and the king, growing tired of living alone, fitted out his ship and sailed out to sea. As he sailed there came upon him so thick a mist that he altogether lost his bearings, but after long trouble he found land. There he laid his ship to, and went on shore all alone. After walking for some time, he came to a forest, into which he went a little way and stopped. Then he heard sweet music from a harp, and went in the direction of the sound until he came to a clearing, and there he saw 3 women, one of whom sat on a golden chair, and was beautifully and grandly dressed. She held a harp in her hands, and was very sorrowful. The second was also finely dressed, but younger in appearance, and also sat on a chair, but it was not so grand as the first ones. The third stood beside them, and was very pretty to look at. She had a green cloak over her other clothes, and it was easy to see that she was maid to the other 2. After the king had looked at them for a little, he went forward and saluted them. The one that sat on the golden chair asked him who he was and where he was going, and he told her all the story, how he was a king, and had lost his queen, and was now on his way to Hetland the Good, to ask the queen of that country in marriage. She answered that fortune had contrived this wonderfully, for pirates had plundered Hetland and killed the king, and she had fled from the land in terror, and had come hither after great trouble. And she was the very person he was looking for, and the others were her daughter and maid. The king immediately asked her hand. She gladly received his proposal, and accepted him at once. Thereafter they all set out, and made their way to the ship. And after that nothing is told of their voyage until the king reached his own country. There he made a great feast, and celebrated his marriage with this woman, and after that things are quiet for a time. Hermod and Hadvor took but little notice of the queen and her daughter, but, on the other hand, Hadvor and the queen's maid, whose name was Olaf, were very friendly, and Olaf came often to visit Hadvor in her castle. Before long, the king went out to war, and no sooner was he away than the queen came to talk with Hermod, and said that she wanted him to marry her daughter. Hermod told her straight and plain that he would not do so, at which the queen grew terribly angry, and said that in that case neither should he have Hadvor, for she would now lay this spell on him, that he should go to a desert island, and there be a lion by day and a man by night. He should also think always of Hadvor, which would cause him all the more sorrow, and from this spell he should never be freed until Hadvor burned the lion's skin, and that would not happen very soon. As soon as the queen had finished her speech, Hermod replied that he also laid a spell on her, and that was, that as soon as he was freed from her enchantments, she should become a rat, and her daughter a mouse, and fight with each other in the hall until he killed them with his sword. After this, Hermod disappeared, and no one knew what had become of him. The queen caused search to be made for him, but he could nowhere be found. One time, when Olaf was in the castle beside Hadvor, she asked the princess if she knew where Hermod had gone to. At this Hadvor became very sad, and said that she did not. "I shall tell you then," said Olaf, "for I know all about it. Hermod has disappeared through the wicked devices of the queen, for she is a witch, and so is her daughter, though they have put on these beautiful forms. Because Hermod would not fall in with the queen's plans and marry her daughter, she has laid a spell on him to go on an island and be a lion by day and a man by night, and never be freed from this until you burn the lion's skin. Besides," said Olaf, "she has looked out a match for you. She has a brother in the underworld, a 3-headed giant, whom she means to turn into a beautiful prince and get him married to you. This is no new thing for the queen. She took me away from my parents' house and compelled me to serve her. But she has never done me any harm, for the green cloak I wear protects me against all mischief. Hadvor now became still sadder than before at the thought of the marriage destined for her, and entreated Olaf to think of some plan to save her. "I think," said Olaf, "that your wooer will come up through the floor of the castle to you, and so you must be prepared when you hear the noise of his coming and the floor begins to open, and have at hand blazing pitch, and pour plenty of it into the opening. That will prove too much for him." About this time the king came home from his expedition, and thought it a great blow that no one knew what had become of Hermod. But the queen consoled him as best she could, and after a time the king thought less about his disappearance. Hadvor remained in her castle, and had made preparations to receive her wooer when he came. One night, not long after, a loud noise and rumbling was heard under the castle. Hadvor at once guessed what it was, and told her maids to be ready to help her. The noise and thundering grew louder and louder, until the floor began to open, whereupon Hadvor made them take the cauldron of pitch and pour plenty of it into the opening. With that, the noises grew fainter and fainter, till at last they ceased altogether. Next morning the queen rose early and went out to the palace gate, and there she found her brother, the giant, lying dead. She went up to him and said, "I pronounce this spell, that you become a beautiful prince, and that Hadvor shall be unable to say anything against the charges that I shall bring against her." The body of the dead giant now became that of a beautiful prince, and the queen went in again. "I don't think," said she to the king, "that your daughter is as good as she is said to be. My brother came and asked her hand, and she has had him put to death. I have just found his dead body lying at the palace gate." The king went along with the queen to see the body, and thought it all very strange. So beautiful a youth, he said, would have been a worthy match for Hadvor, and he would readily have agreed to their marriage. The queen asked leave to decide what Hadvor's punishment should be, which the king was very willing to allow, so as to escape from punishing his own daughter. The queen's decision was that the king should make a big grave mound for her brother, and put Hadvor into it beside him. Olaf knew all the plans of the queen, and went to tell the princess what had been done, whereupon Hadvor earnestly entreated her to tell her what to do. "First and foremost," said Olaf, "you must get a wide cloak to wear over your other clothes when you are put into the mound. The giant's ghost will walk after. You are both left together in there, and he will have 2 dogs along with him. He will ask you to cut pieces out of his legs to give to the dogs, but that you must not promise to do unless he tells you where Hermod has gone to, and tells you how to find him. He will then let you stand on his shoulders so as to get out of the mound. But he means to cheat you all the same, and will catch you by the cloak to pull you back again. But you must take care to have the cloak loose on your shoulders, so that he will only get hold of that." The mound was all ready now, and the giant laid in it, and into it Hadvor also had to go without being allowed to make any defense. After they were both left there, everything happened just as Olaf had said. The prince became a giant again, and asked Hadvor to cut the pieces out of his legs for the dogs, but she refused until he told her that Hermod was in a desert island, which she could not reach, unless she took the skin off the soles of his feet and made shoes out of that. With these shoes she could travel both on land and sea. This Hadvor now did, and the giant then let her get up on his shoulders to get out of the mound. As she sprang out, he caught hold of her cloak, but she had taken care to let it lie loose on her shoulders, and so escaped. She now made her way down to the sea, to where she knew there was the shortest distance over to the island in which Hermod was. This strait she easily crossed, for the shoes kept her up. On reaching the island, she found a sandy beach all along by the sea and high cliffs above. nor could she see any way to get up these, and so, being both sad at heart and tired with the long journey, she lay down and fell asleep. As she slept, she dreamed that a tall woman came to her and said, "I know that you are Princess Hadvor, and are searching for Hermod. He is on this island, but it will be hard for you to get to him if you have no one to help you, for you cannot climb the cliffs by your own strength. I have therefore let down a rope, by which you will be able to climb up. And as the island is so large that you might not find Hermod's dwelling place so easily, I lay down this clue beside you. You need only hold the end of the thread, and the clue will run on before and show you the way. I also lay this belt beside you, to put on when you awaken. It will keep you from growing faint with hunger." The woman now disappeared, and Hadvor woke, and saw that all her dream had been true. The rope hung down from the cliff, and the clue and belt lay beside her. The belt she put on. The rope enabled her to climb up the cliff, and the clue led her on till she came to the mouth of a cave, which was not very big. She went into the cave and saw there a low couch, under which she crept and lay down. When evening came, she heard the noise of footsteps outside, and became aware that the lion had come to the mouth of the cave and shook itself there, after which she heard a man coming towards the couch. She was sure this was Hermod, because she heard him speaking to himself about his own condition, and calling to mind Hadvor and other things in the old days. Hadvor made no sign, but waited till he had fallen asleep, and then crept out and burned the lion's skin, which he had left outside. Then she went back into the cave and wakened Hermod, and they had a most joyful meeting. In the morning they talked over their plans, and were most at a loss to know how to get out of the island. Hadvor told Hermod her dream, and said she suspected there was someone in the island who would be able to help them. Hermod said he knew of a witch there, who was very ready to help anyone, and that the only plan was to go to her. So they went to the witch's cave, and found her there with her 15 young sons, and asked her to help them to get to the mainland. "There are other things easier than that," said she, "for the giant that was buried will be waiting for you, and will attack you on the way, as he has turned himself into a big whale. I shall lend you a boat, however, and if you meet the whale and think your lives are in danger, then you can name me by name." They thanked her greatly for her help and advice, and set out from the island. But on the way they saw a huge fish coming towards them, with great splashing and dashing of waves. They were sure of what it was, and thought they had as good reason as ever they would have to call on the witch, and so they did. The next minute they saw coming after them another huge whale, followed by 15 smaller ones. All of these swam past the boat and went on to meet the whale. There was a fierce battle then, and the sea became so stormy that it was not very easy to keep the boat from being filled by the waves. After this fight had gone on for some time, they saw that the sea was dyed with blood. The big whale and the 15 smaller ones disappeared, and they got to land safe and sound. Now the story goes back to the king's hall, where strange things had happened in the meantime. The queen and her daughter had disappeared, but a rat and a mouse were always fighting with each other there. Ever so many people had tried to drive them away, but no one could manage it. Thus some time went on, while the king was almost beside himself with sorrow and care for the loss of his queen. And because these monsters destroyed all mirth in the hall. One evening, however, while they all sat dull and downhearted, in came Hermod with a sword by his side, and saluted the king, who received him with the greatest joy, as if he had come back from the dead. Before Hermod sat down, however, he went to where the rat and the mouse were fighting, and cut them in two with his sword. All were astonished then by seeing two witches lying dead on the floor of the hall. Hermod now told the whole story to the king, who was very glad to be rid of such vile creatures. Next he asked for the hand of Hadvor, which the king readily gave him, and being now an old man, gave the kingdom to him as well, and so Hermod became king. Olaf married a good-looking nobleman, and that is the end of the story. There was once upon a time a man who understood all sorts of arts. He served in the war, and bore himself bravely and well. But when the war was over, he got his discharge, and set out on his travels with 3 farthings of his pay in his pocket. "Wait," he said, "that does not please me. Only let me find the right people, and the king shall yet give me all the treasures of his kingdom." He strode angrily into the forest, and there he saw a man standing who had uprooted 6 trees as if they were straws. He said to him, "Will you be my servant and travel with me?" "Yes," he answered, "but first of all I will take this little bundle of sticks home to my mother." And he took one of the trees and wound it round the other 5, raised the bundle on his shoulders and bore it off. Then he came back and went with his master, who said, "We two ought to be able to travel through the wide world." And when they had gone a little way, they came upon a hunter who was on his knees, his gun on his shoulder, aiming at something. The master said to him, "Hunter, what are you aiming at?" He answered, 2 miles from this place sits a fly on a branch of an oak. I want to shoot out its left eye." "Oh, go with me," said the man. "If we 3 are together, we shall easily travel through the wide world." The hunter agreed and went with him, and they came to 7 windmills whose sails were going round quite fast, and yet there was not a breath of wind, nor was a leaf moving. The man said, "I don't know what is turning those windmills. There is not the slightest breeze blowing." So he walked on with his servants, and when they had gone 2 miles they saw a man sitting on a tree, holding one of his nostrils and blowing out of the other. "Fellow, what are you puffing at up there?" asked the man. He replied, 2 miles from this place are standing 7 windmills. See, I am blowing to drive them round." "Oh, go with me," said the man. "If we 4 are together, we shall easily travel through the wide world." So the blower got down and went with him, and after a time they saw a man who was standing on one leg and had unstrapped the other and laid it near him. "Then," said the master, "you have made yourself very comfortable to rest." "I am a runner," answered he, "and so that I shall not go too quickly, I have unstrapped one leg. When I run with 2 legs, I go faster than a bird flies. Oh, go with me. If we 5 are together, we shall easily travel through the wide world." So he went with him, and not long afterwards they met a man who wore a little hat, but he had it slouched over one ear. "Manners, manners," said the master to him. "Don't hang your hat over one ear. You look like a madman." "I dare not," said the other, "for if I were to put my hat on straight, there would come such a frost that the very birds in the sky would freeze and fall dead on the earth." "Oh, go with me," said the master. "If we 6 are together, we shall easily travel through the wide world." Now the 6 came to a town in which the king had proclaimed that whoever should run with his daughter in a race and win should become her husband. But if he lost, he must lose his head. This was reported to the man who declared he would compete. "But," he said, "I shall let my servant run for me." The king replied, "Then both your heads must be staked, and your head and his must be guaranteed for the winner." When this was agreed upon and settled, the man strapped on the runner's other leg, saying to him, Now be nimble, and see that we win." It was arranged that whoever should first bring water out of a stream a long way off should be the victor. Then the runner got a pitcher, and the king's daughter another, and they began to run at the same time. But in a moment, when the king's daughter was only just a little way off, no spectator could see the runner, and it seemed as if the wind had whistled past. In a short time he reached the stream, filled his pitcher with water, and turned round again. But halfway home, a great drowsiness came over him. He put down his pitcher, lay down, and fell asleep. He had, however, put a horse's skull, which was lying on the ground, for his pillow, so that he should not be too comfortable and might soon wake up. In the meantime, the king's daughter, who could also run well as an ordinary man could, reached the stream and hastened back with her pitcher full of water. When she saw the runner lying there asleep, she was delighted and said, "My enemy is given into my hands." She emptied his pitcher and ran on. Everything now would have been lost, if by good luck the hunter had not been standing on the castle tower and had seen everything with his sharp eyes. "Ah," said he, "the king's daughter shall not overreach us," and, loading his gun, he shot so cleverly that he shot away the horse's skull from under the runner's head without its hurting him. Then the runner awoke, jumped up, and saw that his pitcher was empty and the king's daughter far ahead. But he did not lose courage, and ran back to the stream with his pitcher, filled it once more with water, and was home 10 minutes before the king's daughter arrived. "Look," said he, "I have only just exercised my legs. That was nothing of a run." But the king was angry, and his daughter even more so, that she should be carried away by a common, discharged soldier. They consulted together how they could destroy both him and his companions. "Then," said the king to her, "I have found a way. Don't be frightened. They shall not come home again." He said to them, "You must now make merry together, and eat and drink." And he led them into a room which had a floor of iron. The doors were also of iron, and the windows were barred with iron. In the room was a table spread with delicious food. The king said to them, "Go in and enjoy yourselves." And as soon as they were inside, he had the doors shut and bolted. Then he made the cook come, and ordered him to keep up a large fire under the room until the iron was red hot. The cook did so, and the 6 sitting round the table felt it grow very warm, and they thought this was because of their good fare. But when the heat became still greater, and they wanted to go out, but found the doors and windows fastened, then they knew that the king meant them harm, and was trying to suffocate them. "But he shall not succeed," cried he of the little hat. "I will make a frost come, which shall make the fire ashamed and die out." So he put his hat on straight, and at once there came such a frost that all the heat disappeared, and the food on the dishes began to freeze. When a couple of hours had passed, and the king thought they must be quite dead from the heat, he had the doors opened and went in himself to see. But when the doors were opened, there stood all 6, alive and well, saying they were glad they could come out to warm themselves, for the great cold in the room had frozen all the food hard in the dishes. Then the king went angrily to the cook and scolded him, and asked him why he had not done what he was told. But the cook answered, "There is heat enough there. See for yourself." Then the king saw a huge fire burning under the iron room, and understood that he could do no harm to the 6 in this way. The king now began again to think how he could free himself from his unwelcome guests. He commanded the master to come before him and said, "If you will take gold and give up your right to my daughter, you shall have as much as you like." "Oh, yes, your majesty," answered he. "Give me as much as my servant can carry, and I will give up your daughter." The king was delighted, and the man said, "I will come and fetch it in 14 days." Then he called all the tailors in the kingdom together, and made them sit down for 14 days sewing at a sack. When it was finished, he made the strong man who had uprooted the trees take the sack on his shoulder and go with him to the king. Then the king said, "What a powerful fellow that is, carrying that bale of linen as large as a house on his shoulder." And he was much frightened, and thought, "What a lot of gold he will make away with." Then he had a ton of gold brought, which 16 of the strongest men had to carry. But the strong man seized it with one hand, put it in the sack, saying, "Why don't you bring me more? That scarcely covers the bottom." Then the king had to send again and again to fetch his treasures, which the strong man shoved into the sack, and the sack was only half full. "Bring more," he cried, "these crumbs don't fill it." So 7,000 wagons of the gold of the whole kingdom were driven up. These the strong man shoved into the sack, oxen and all. "I will no longer be particular," he said, "and will take what comes, so that the sack shall be full." When everything was put in, and there was not yet enough, he said, "I will make an end of this. It is easy to fasten a sack when it is not full." Then he threw it on his back and went with his companions. Now, when the king saw how a single man was carrying away the wealth of the whole country, he was very angry, and made his cavalry mount and pursue the 6, and bring back the strong man with the sack. 2 regiments soon overtook them, and called to them, "You are prisoners. Lay down the sack of gold, or you shall be cut down." "What do you say?" said the blower. "We are prisoners. Before that, you shall dance in the air." And he held one nostril and blew with the other at the 2 regiments. They were separated and blown away in the blue sky over the mountains, one this way and the other that. A sergeant major cried for mercy, saying he had 9 wounds, and was a brave fellow, and did not deserve this disgrace. So the blower let him off, and he came down without hurt. Then he said to him, "Now go home to the king, and say that if he sends any more cavalry, I will blow them all into the air." When the king received the message, he said, "Let the fellows go. They are bewitched." Then the 6 brought the treasure home, shared it among themselves, and lived contentedly till the end of their days. How to tell a true princess. There was once upon a time a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she must be a true princess. So he travelled through the whole world to find one, but there was always something against each. There were plenty of princesses, but he could not find out if they were true princesses. In every case there was some little defect which showed the genuine article was not yet found. So he came home again in very low spirits, for he had wanted very much to have a true princess. One night there was a dreadful storm. It thundered and lightened, and the rain streamed down in torrents. It was fearful. There was a knocking heard at the palace gate, and the old king went to open it. There stood a princess outside the gate, but oh, in what a sad plight she was from the rain and the storm. The water was running down from her hair and her dress into the points of her shoes and out at the heels again. And yet she said she was a true princess. "Well, we shall soon find that," thought the old queen. But she said nothing, and went into the sleeping room, took off all the bedclothes, and laid a pea on the bottom of the bed. Then she put 20 mattresses on top of the pea, and 20 eider-down quilts on the top of the mattresses. And this was the bed in which the princess was to sleep. The next morning she was asked how she had slept. "Oh, very badly," said the princess. "I scarcely closed my eyes all night. I am sure I don't know what was in the bed. I laid on something so hard that my whole body is black and blue. It is dreadful." Now they perceived that she was a true princess, because she had felt the pea through the 20 mattresses and the 20 eider-down quilts. No one but a true princess could be so sensitive. So the prince married her, for now he knew that at last he had got hold of a true princess, and the pea was put into the royal museum, where it is still to be seen if no one has stolen it. Now this is a true story. In the land of souls. Far away in North America, where the Red Indians dwell, there lived a long time ago a beautiful maiden who was lovelier than any other girl in the whole tribe. Many of the young braves sought her in marriage, but she would listen to one only, a handsome chief who had taken her fancy some years before. So they were to be married, and great rejoicings were made, and the two looked forward to a long life of happiness together. When the very night before the wedding feast, a sudden illness seized the girl, and, without a word to her friends who were weeping round her, she passed silently away. The heart of her lover had been set upon her, and the thought of her remained with him night and day. He put aside his bow, and went neither to fight nor to hunt, but from sunrise to sunset he sat by the place where she was laid, thinking of his happiness that was buried there. At last, after many days, a light seemed to come to him out of the darkness. He remembered having heard from the old people of the tribe that there was a path that led to the land of souls, that if you sought carefully you could find it. So the next morning he got up early, and put some food in his pouch, and slung an extra skin over his shoulders, for he knew not how long his journey would take, nor what sort of country he would have to go through. Only one thing he knew, that if the path was there, he would find it. At first he was puzzled, as there seemed no reason he should go in one direction more than another. Then all at once he thought he had heard one of the old men say that the land of souls lay to the south, and so, filled with new hope and courage, he set his face southwards. For many, many miles the country looked the same as it did round his own home. The forests, the hills, and the rivers all seemed exactly like the ones he had left. The only thing that was different was the snow, which had lain thick upon the hills and trees when he started, but grew less and less the farther he went south, till it disappeared altogether. Soon the trees put forth their buds, and flowers sprang up under his feet, and instead of thick clouds there was blue sky over his head, and everywhere the birds were singing. Then he knew that he was in the right road. The thought that he should soon behold his lost bride made his heart beat for joy, and he sped along lightly and swiftly. Now his way led through a dark wood, and then over some steep cliffs, and on the top of these he found a hut, or wigwam. An old man, clothed in skins and holding a staff in his hand, stood in the doorway, and he said to the young chief, who was beginning to tell his story, "I was waiting for you, wherefore you have come." "I know. It is but a short while since she whom you seek was here. Rest in my hut, as she also rested, and I will tell you what you ask, and whither you should go." On hearing these words, the young man entered the hut, but his heart was too eager within him to suffer him to rest, and when he arose, the old man rose too, and stood with him at the door. "Look," he said, "at the water which lies far out yonder, and the plains which stretch beyond. That is the land of souls, but no man enters it without leaving his body behind him. So lay down your body here, your bow and arrows, your skin, and your dog. They shall be kept for you safely." Then he turned away, and the young chief, light as air, seemed hardly to touch the ground, and as he flew along the scents grew sweeter and the flowers more beautiful, while the animals rubbed their noses against him, instead of hiding as he approached. and birds circled round him, and fishes lifted up their heads and looked as he went by. Very soon he noticed with wonder that neither rocks nor trees barred his path. He passed through them without knowing it, for indeed they were not rocks and trees at all, but only the souls of them. For this was the land of shadows. So he went on with winged feet till he came to the shores of a great lake, with a lovely island in the middle of it, while on the bank of the lake was a canoe of glittering stone, and in the canoe were two shining paddles. The chief jumped straight into the canoe, and seizing the paddles, pushed off from the shore, when to his joy and wonder he saw following him in another canoe exactly like his own, the maiden for whose sake he had made this long journey. But they could not touch each other, for between them rode great waves, which looked as if they would sink the boats, yet never did. And the young man and the maiden shrank with fear, for down in the depths of the water they saw the bones of those who had died before, and in the waves themselves men and women were struggling, and but few passed over. Only the children had no fear, and reached the other side in safety. Still, though the chief and the young girl quailed in terror at these horrible sights and sounds, no harm came to them, for their lives had been free from evil, and the Master of Life had said that no evil should happen unto them. So they reached unhurt the shore of the happy island, and wandered through the flowery fields and by the banks of rushing streams, and they knew not hunger nor thirst, neither cold nor heat. The air fed them, and the sun warmed them, and they forgot the dead, for they saw no graves, and the young man's thoughts turned not to wars, neither to the hunting of animals. And gladly would these two have walked thus forever. But in the murmur of the wind he heard the Master of Life saying to him, "Return whither you came, for I have work for you to do, and your people need you, and for many years you shall rule over them. At the gate my messenger awaits you, and you shall take again your body which you left behind, and he will show you what you are to do. Listen to him, and have patience, and in time to come you shall rejoin her whom you must now leave, for she is accepted, and will remain ever young and beautiful, as when I called her hence from the land of snows." Prince Ring. Once upon a time there was a king and his queen in their kingdom. They had one daughter who was called Ingiborg, and one son whose name was Ring. He was less fond of adventures than men of rank usually were in those days, and was not famous for strength or feats of arms. When he was 12 years old, one fine winter day, he rode into the forest along with his men to enjoy himself. They went on a long way, until they caught sight of a hind with a gold ring on its horns. The prince was eager to catch it, if possible, so they gave chase and rode on without stopping until all the horses began to founder beneath them. At last the prince's horse gave way too, and then there came over them a darkness so black that they could no longer see the hind. By this time they were far away from any house, and thought it was high time to be making their way home again. But they found they had got lost now. At first they all kept together, but soon each began to think that he knew the right way best. So they separated, and all went in different directions. The prince, too, had got lost like the rest, and wandered on for a time, until he came to a little clearing in the forest not far from the sea, where he saw a woman sitting on a chair and a big barrel standing beside her. The prince went up to her and saluted her politely, and she received him very graciously. He looked down into the barrel then, and saw lying at the bottom an unusually beautiful gold ring, which pleased him so much that he could not take his eyes off it. The woman saw this, and said that he might have it if he would take the trouble to get it, for which the prince thanked her, and said it was at least worth trying. So he leaned over into the barrel, which did not seem very deep, and thought he would easily reach the ring. But the more he stretched down after it, the deeper grew the barrel. As he was thus bending down into it, the woman suddenly rose up and pushed him in head first, saying that now he could take up his quarters there. Then she fixed the top on the barrel and threw it out into the sea. The prince thought himself in a bad plight now, as he felt the barrel floating out from the land and tossing about on the waves. How many days he spent thus he could not tell. But at last he felt that the barrel was knocking against rocks, at which he was a little cheered, thinking it was probably land and not merely a reef in the sea. Being something of a swimmer, he at last made up his mind to kick the bottom out of the barrel, and having done so, he was able to get on shore. For the rocks by the sea were smooth and level, but overhead there were high cliffs. It seemed difficult to get up these, but he went along the foot of them for a little, till at last he tried to climb up, which at last he did. Having got to the top, he looked round about him and saw that he was on an island, which was covered with forest, with apples growing, and altogether pleasant as far as the land was concerned. After he had been there several days, he one day heard a great noise in the forest, which made him terribly afraid, so that he ran to hide himself among the trees. Then he saw a giant approaching, dragging a sledge loaded with wood, and making straight for him, so that he could see nothing for it but to lie down just where he was. When the giant came across him, he stood still and looked at the prince for a little. Then he took him up in his arms and carried him home to his house, and was exceedingly kind to him. He gave him to his wife, saying he had found this child in the wood, and she could have it to help her in the house. The old woman was greatly pleased, and began to fondle the prince with the utmost delight. He stayed there with them, and was very willing and obedient to them in everything, while they grew kinder to him every day. One day the giant took him round and showed him all his rooms except the parlour. This made the prince curious to have a look into it, thinking there must be some very rare treasure there. So one day, when the giant had gone into the forest, he tried to get into the parlour and managed to get the door open halfway. Then he saw that some living creature moved inside and ran along the floor towards him and said something, which made him so frightened that he sprang back from the door and shut it again. As soon as the fright began to pass off, he tried it again, for he thought it would be interesting to hear what it said, but things went just as before with him. He then got angry with himself, and, summoning up all his courage, tried it a third time, and opened the door of the room and stood firm. Then he saw that it was a big dog, which spoke to him and said, "Choose me, Prince Ring." The prince went away rather afraid, thinking with himself that it was no great treasure after all, but all the same, what it had said to him stuck in his mind. It is not said how long the prince stayed with the giant, but one day the latter came to him and said he would now take him over to the mainland out of the island, for he himself had no long time to live. He also thanked him for his good service, and told him to choose someone of his possessions, for he would get whatever he wanted. Ring thanked him heartily, and said there was no need to pay him for his services. They were so little worth, but if he did wish to give him anything, he would choose what was in the parlour. The giant was taken by surprise, and said, "There, you chose my old woman's right hand, but I must not break my word." Upon this he went to get the dog, which came running with signs of great delight, but the prince was so much afraid of it that it was all he could do to keep from showing his alarm. After this the giant accompanied him down to the sea, where he saw a stone boat, which was just big enough to hold the two of them and the dog. On reaching the mainland, the giant took a friendly farewell of Ring, and told him he might take possession of all that was in the island after he and his wife died, which would happen within 2 weeks from that time. The prince thanked him for this and for all his other kindnesses, and the giant returned home, while Ring went up some distance from the sea. But he did not know what land he had come to, and was afraid to speak to the dog. After he had walked on in silence for a time, the dog spoke to him and said, "You don't seem to have much curiosity, seeing you never ask my name." The prince then forced himself to ask, "What is your name?" "You had best call me Snutty." "Snutty," said the dog, "now we are coming to a king's seat, and you must ask the king to keep us all winter, and to give you a little room for both of us." The prince now began to be less afraid of the dog. They came to the king and asked him to keep them all the winter, to which he agreed. When the king's men saw the dog, they began to laugh at it, and make as if they would tease it. But when the prince saw this, he advised them not to do it, or they might have the worst of it. They replied that they didn't care a bit what he thought. After Ring had been with the king for some days, the latter began to think there was a great deal in him, and esteemed him more than the others. The king, however, had a counsellor called Red, who became very jealous when he saw how much the king esteemed Ring, and one day he talked to him, and said he could not understand why he had so good an opinion of this stranger, who had not yet shown himself superior to other men in anything. The king replied that it was only a short time since he had come there. Red then asked him to send them both to cut down wood next morning, and see which of them could do most work. Snutty heard this and told it to Ring, advising him to ask the king for 2 axes, so that he might have one in reserve if the first one got broken. Next morning the king asked Ring and Red to go and cut down trees for him, and both agreed. Ring got the 2 axes, and each went his own way. But when the prince had got out into the wood, Snutty took one of the axes and began to hew along with him. In the evening the king came to look over their day's work, as Red had proposed, and found that Ring's wood heap was more than twice as big. "I suspected," said the king, "that Ring was not quite useless. Never have I seen such a day's work." Ring was now in far greater esteem with the king than before, and Red was all the more discontented. One day he came to the king and said, "If Ring is such a mighty man, I think you might ask him to kill the wild oxen in the wood here, and flay them the same day, and bring you the horns and the hides in the evening." "Don't you think that a desperate errand?" said the king, "seeing they are so dangerous, and no one has ever yet ventured to go against them?" Red answered that he had only 1 life to lose, and it would be interesting to see how brave he was. Besides, the king would have good reason to ennoble him if he overcame them. The king at last allowed himself, though rather unwillingly, to be won over by Red's persistency, and one day asked Ring to go and kill the oxen that were in the wood for him, and bring their horns and hides to him in the evening. Not knowing how dangerous the oxen were, Ring was quite ready, and went off at once, to the great delight of Red, who was now sure of his death. As soon as Ring came in sight of the oxen, they came bellowing to meet him. One of them was tremendously big, the other rather less. Ring grew terribly afraid. "How do you like them?" asked Snutty. "Not well at all," said the prince. "We can do nothing else," said Snutty, "than attack them, if it is to go well. You will go against the little one, and I shall take the other." With this, Snutty leapt at the big one, and was not long in bringing him down. Meanwhile, the prince went against the other with fear and trembling, and by the time Snutty came to help him, the ox had nearly got him under. But Snutty was not slow in helping his master to kill it. Each of them then began to flay their own ox, but Ring was only half through by the time Snutty had finished his. In the evening, after they had finished this task, the prince thought himself unfit to carry all the horns and both the hides, so Snutty told him to lay them all on his back until they got to the palace gate. The prince agreed, and laid everything on the dog except the skin of the smaller ox, which he staggered along with himself. At the palace gate he left everything lying, went before the king, and asked him to come that length with him, and there handed over to him the hides and horns of the oxen. The king was greatly surprised at his valour, and said he knew no one like him, and thanked him heartily for what he had done. After this, the king set Ring next to himself, and all esteemed him highly, and held him to be a great hero, nor could Red any longer say anything against him, though he grew still more determined to destroy him. One day a good idea came into his head. He came to the king and said he had something to say to him. "What is that?" said the king. Red said that he had just remembered the gold cloak, gold chessboard, and bright gold piece that the king had lost about a year before. "Don't remind me of them," said the king. Red, however, went on to say that since Ring was such a mighty man that he could do everything, it had occurred to him to advise the king to ask him to search for these treasures and come back with them before Christmas. In return, the king should promise him his daughter. The king replied that he thought it altogether unbecoming to propose such a thing to Ring, seeing that he could not tell him where the things were. But Red pretended not to hear the king's excuses, and went on talking about it until the king gave in to him. One day, a month or so before Christmas, the king spoke to Ring, saying that he wished to ask a great favour of him. "What is that?" said Ring. "It is this," said the king, "that you find for me my gold cloak, my gold chessboard, and my bright gold piece, that were stolen from me about a year ago. If you can bring them to me before Christmas, I will give you my daughter in marriage." "Where am I to look for them, then?" said Ring. "That you must find out for yourself," said the king. "I don't know." Ring now left the king, and was very silent, for he saw he was in a great difficulty, but, on the other hand, he thought it was excellent to have such a chance of winning the king's daughter. Snati noticed that his master was at a loss, and said to him that he should not disregard what the king had asked him to do, but he would have to act upon his advice, otherwise he would get into great difficulties. The prince assented to this and began to prepare for the journey. After he had taken leave of the king and was setting out on the search, Snati said to him, "Now you must first of all go about the neighbourhood and gather as much salt as ever you can." The prince did so, and gathered so much salt that he could hardly carry it. But Snati said, "Throw it on my back," which he accordingly did, and the dog then ran on before the prince until they came to the foot of a steep cliff. "We must go up here," said Snati. "I don't think that will be child's play," said the prince. "Hold fast by my tail," said Snati, and in this way he pulled Ring up on the lowest shelf of the rock. The prince began to get giddy, but up went Snati onto the second shelf. Ring was nearly swooning by this time, but Snati made a third effort and reached the top of the cliff, where the prince fell down in a faint. After a little, however, he recovered again, and they went a short distance along a level plain until they came to a cave. This was on Christmas Eve. They went up above the cave and found a window in it, through which they looked, and saw 4 trolls lying asleep beside the fire, over which a large porridge pot was hanging. "Now you must empty all the salt into the porridge pot," said Snati. Ring did so, and soon the trolls wakened up. The old hag, who was the most frightful of them all, went first to taste the porridge. "How comes this?" she said. "The porridge is salt. I got the milk by witchcraft yesterday out of 4 kingdoms, and now it is salt." All the others then came to taste the porridge, and thought it nice, but after they had finished it, the old hag grew so thirsty that she could stand it no longer, and asked her daughter to go out and bring her some water from the river that ran nearby. "I won't go," said she, "unless you lend me your bright gold piece." "Though I should die, you shan't have that," said the hag. "Die, then," said the girl. "Well, then, take it." "You brat," said the old hag, "and be off with you, and make haste with the water." The girl took the gold and ran out with it, and it was so bright that it shone all over the plain. As soon as she came to the river, she lay down to take a drink of the water, but meanwhile the two of them had got down off the roof and thrust her head first into the river. The old hag began now to long for the water, and said that the girl would be running about with the gold piece all over the plain, so she asked her son to go and get her a drop of water. "I won't go," said he, "unless I get the gold cloak." "Though I should die, you shan't have that," said the hag. "Die, then," said the son. "Well, then, take it," said the old hag, "and be off with you, but you must make haste with the water." He put on the cloak, and when he came outside it shone so bright that he could see to go with it. On reaching the river, he went to take a drink like his sister, but at that moment Ring and Snati sprang upon him, took the cloak from him, and threw him into the river. The old hag could stand the thirst no longer, and asked her husband to go for a drink for her. "The brats," she said, "were of course running about and playing themselves, just as she had expected they would. Little wretches that they were." "I won't go," said the old troll, "unless you lend me the gold chessboard." "Though I should die, you shan't have that," said the hag. "I think you may just as well do that," said he, "since you won't grant me such a little favour." "Take it then, you utter disgrace," said the old hag, "since you are just like these two brats." The old troll now went out with the gold chessboard and down to the river, and was about to take a drink, when Ring and Snati came upon him, took the chessboard from him, and threw him into the river. Before they had got back again, however, and up on top of the cave, they saw the poor old fellow's ghost come marching up from the river. Snati immediately sprang upon him, and Ring assisted in the attack, and after a hard struggle, they mastered him a second time. When they got back again to the window, they saw that the old hag was moving towards the door. "Now we must go in at once," said Snati, "and try to master her there, for if she once gets out, we shall have no chance with her. She is the worst witch that ever lived, and no iron can cut her. One of us must pour boiling porridge out of the pot on her, and the other punch her with red-hot iron." In they went then, and no sooner did the hag see them than she said, "So you have come, Prince Ring. You must have seen to my husband and children." Snati saw that she was about to attack them, and sprang at her with a red-hot iron from the fire, while Ring kept pouring boiling porridge on her without stopping, and in this way they at last got her killed. Then they burned the old troll and her to ashes, and explored the cave, where they found plenty of gold and treasures. The most valuable of these they carried with them as far as the cliff, and left them there. Then they hastened home to the king with his 3 treasures, where they arrived late on Christmas night, and Ring handed them over to him. The king was beside himself with joy, and was astonished at how clever a man Ring was in all kinds of feats, so that he esteemed him still more highly than before, and betrothed his daughter to him, and the feast for this was to last all through Christmas-tide. Ring thanked the king courteously for this and all his other kindnesses, and as soon as he had finished eating and drinking in the hall went off to sleep in his own room. Snati, however, asked permission to sleep in the prince's bed for that night, while the prince should sleep where the dog usually lay. Ring said he was welcome to do so, and that he deserved more from him than that came to. So Snati went up into the prince's bed, but after a time he came back, and told Ring he could go there himself now, but to take care not to meddle with anything that was in the bed. Now the story comes back to Red, who came into the hall and showed the king his right arm wanting the hand, and said that now he could see what kind of a man his intended son-in-law was, for he had done this to him without any cause whatever. The king became very angry and said he would soon find out the truth about it, and if Ring had cut off his hand without good cause, he should be hanged, but if it was otherwise, then Red should die. So the king sent for Ring and asked him for what reason he had done this. Snutty, however, had just told Ring what had happened during the night, and in reply he asked the king to go with him and he would show him something. The king went with him to his sleeping room and saw lying on the bed a man's hand holding a sword. "This hand," said Ring, "came over the partition during the night, and was about to run me through in my bed, if I had not defended myself." The king answered that in that case he could not blame him for protecting his own life, and that Red was well worthy of death. So Red was hanged, and Ring married the king's daughter. The first night that they went to bed together, Snatty asked Ring to allow him to lie at their feet, and this Ring allowed him to do. During the night he heard a howling and outcry beside them, struck a light in a hurry and saw an ugly dog skin lying near him, and a beautiful prince in the bed. Ring instantly took the skin and burned it, and then shook the prince, who was lying unconscious, until he woke up. The bridegroom then asked his name. He replied that he was called Ring, and was a king's son. In his youth he had lost his mother, and in her place his father had married a witch, who had laid a spell on him that he should turn into a dog, and never be released from the spell unless a prince of the same name as himself allowed him to sleep at his feet the first night after his marriage. He added further, "As soon as she knew that you were my namesake, she tried to get you destroyed, so that you might not free me from the spell. She was the hind that you and your companions chased. She was the woman that you found in the clearing with the barrel, and the old hag that we just now killed in the cave." After the feasting was over, the two namesakes, along with other men, went to the cliff and brought all the treasure home to the palace. Then they went to the island and removed all that was valuable from it. Ring gave to his namesake, whom he had freed from the spell, his sister Ingeborg and his father's kingdom to look after, but he himself stayed with his father-in-law the king, and had half the kingdom while he lived, and the whole of it after his death. Story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Many years ago there lived an emperor who was so fond of new clothes that he spent all his money on them in order to be beautifully dressed. He did not care about his soldiers, he did not care about the theatre, he only liked to go out walking to show off his new clothes. He had a coat for every hour of the day, and just as they say of a king, he is in the council chamber. They always said here, the emperor is in the wardrobe. In the great city in which he lived there was always something going on. Every day many strangers came there. One day 2 impostors arrived who gave themselves out as weavers and said that they knew how to manufacture the most beautiful cloth imaginable. Not only were the texture and pattern uncommonly beautiful, but the clothes which were made of the stuff possessed this wonderful property, that they were invisible to anyone who was not fit for his office or who was unpardonably stupid. "Those must indeed be splendid clothes," thought the emperor. "If I had them on, I could find out which men in my kingdom are unfit for the offices they hold. I could distinguish the wise from the stupid. Yes, this cloth must be woven for me at once." And he gave both the impostors much money, so that they might begin their work. They placed 2 weaving looms and began to do as if they were working, but they had not the least thing on the looms. They also demanded the finest silk and the best gold, which they put in their pockets and worked at the empty looms till late into the night. I should like very much to know how far they have got on with the cloth, thought the emperor. But he remembered when he thought about it that whoever was stupid or not fit for his office would not be able to see it. Now he certainly believed that he had nothing to fear for himself, but he wanted first to send somebody else in order to see how he stood with regard to his office. Everybody in the whole town knew what a wonderful power the cloth had, and they were all curious to see how bad or how stupid their neighbor was. I will send my old and honored minister to the weavers, thought the emperor. He can judge best what the cloth is like, for he has intellect, and no one understands his office better than he. Now the good old minister went into the hall, where the two impostors sat working at the empty weaving looms. "Dear me," thought the old minister, opening his eyes wide, "I can see nothing." But he did not say so. Both the impostors begged him to be so kind as to step closer, and asked him if it were not a beautiful texture and lovely colours. They pointed to the empty loom, and the poor old minister went forward rubbing his eyes, but he could see nothing, for there was nothing there. "Dear, dear," thought he, "can I be stupid? I have never thought that, and nobody must know it. Can I be not fit for my office? No, I must certainly not say that I cannot see the cloth." "Have you nothing to say about it?" asked one of the men who was weaving. "Oh, it is lovely, most lovely," answered the old minister, looking through his spectacles. "What a texture! What colours! Yes, I will tell the emperor that it pleases me very much." "Now we are delighted at that," said both the weavers, and thereupon they named the colours and explained the make of the texture. The old minister paid great attention, so that he could tell the same to the emperor when he came back to him, which he did. The impostors now wanted more money, more silk, and more gold to use in their weaving. They put it all in their own pockets, and there came no threads on the loom, but they went on as they had done before, working at the empty loom. The emperor soon sent another worthy statesman to see how the weaving was getting on, and whether the cloth would soon be finished. It was the same with him as the first one. He looked and looked, but because there was nothing on the empty loom, he could see nothing. "Is it not a beautiful piece of cloth?" asked the two impostors, and they pointed to and described the splendid material which was not there. "Stupid I am not," thought the man, "so it must be my good office for which I am not fitted. It is strange, certainly, but no one must be allowed to notice it." And so he praised the cloth which he did not see, and expressed to them his delight at the beautiful colours and the splendid texture. "Yes, it is quite beautiful," he said to the emperor. Everybody in the town was talking of the magnificent cloth. Now the emperor wanted to see it himself while it was still on the loom. With a great crowd of select followers, amongst whom were both the worthy statesmen who had already been there before, he went to the cunning impostors, who were now weaving with all their might, but without fibre or thread. "Is it not splendid?" said both the old statesmen who had already been there. "See, your majesty, what a texture! What colours!" And then they pointed to the empty loom, for they believed that the others could see the cloth quite well. "What?" thought the emperor. "I can see nothing. This is indeed horrible. Am I stupid? Am I not fit to be emperor? That were the most dreadful thing that could happen to me. Oh, it is very beautiful," he said. "It has my gracious approval." And then he nodded pleasantly and examined the empty loom, for he would not say that he could see nothing. His whole court round him looked and saw no more than the others, but they said, like the emperor, "Oh, it is beautiful." and they advised him to wear these new and magnificent clothes for the first time at the great procession which was soon to take place. "Splendid! Lovely! Most beautiful!" went from mouth to mouth. Everyone seemed delighted over them, and the emperor gave to the impostors the title of court weavers to the emperor. Throughout the whole of the night, before the morning on which the procession was to take place, the impostors were up and were working by the light of over 16 candles. The people could see that they were very busy making the emperor's new clothes ready. They pretended they were taking the cloth from the loom, cut with huge scissors in the air, sewed with needles without thread, and then said at last, "Now the clothes are finished." The emperor came himself with his most distinguished knights, and each impostor held up his arm just as if he were holding something, and said, "See, here are the breeches, here is the coat, here the cloak," and so on. Spun clothes are so comfortable that one would imagine one had nothing on at all, but that is the beauty of it. "Yes," said all the knights, but they could see nothing, for there was nothing there. "Will it please your majesty graciously to take off your clothes?" said the impostors. "Then we will put on the new clothes, here before the mirror." The emperor took off all his clothes, and the impostors placed themselves before him as if they were putting on each part of his new clothes, which was ready, and the emperor turned and bent himself in front of the mirror. "How beautifully they fit! How well they sit!" said everybody. "What material? What colors? It is a gorgeous suit." "They are waiting outside with the canopy which your majesty is wont to have borne over you in the procession," announced the master of the ceremonies. "Look, I am ready," said the emperor. "Doesn't it sit well?" And he turned himself again to the mirror to see if his finery was on all right. The chamberlains, who were used to carry the train, put their hands near the floor, as if they were lifting up the train. Then they did as if they were holding something in the air. They would not have it noticed that they could see nothing. So the emperor went along in the procession under the splendid canopy, and all the people in the streets and at the windows said, "How matchless are the emperor's new clothes! That train fastened to his dress, how beautifully it hangs!" No one wished it to be noticed that he could see nothing, for then he would have been unfit for his office, or else very stupid. None of the emperor's clothes had met with such approval as these had. "But he has nothing on," said a little child at last. "Just listen to the innocent child," said the father, and each one whispered to his neighbor what the child had said. "But he has nothing on," the whole of the people called out at last. This struck the emperor, for it seemed to him as if they were right. But he thought to himself, "I must go on with the procession now." And the chamberlains walked along still more uprightly, holding up the train, which was not there at all. The Blue Mountains. There were once a Scotsman and an Englishman and an Irishman serving in the army together, who took it into their heads to run away on the first opportunity they could get. The chance came, and they took it. They went on traveling for 2 days through a great forest, without food or drink, and without coming across a single house, and every night they had to climb up into the trees through fear of the wild beasts that were in the wood. On the second morning, the Scotsman saw from the top of his tree a great castle far away. He said to himself that he would certainly die if he stayed in the forest without anything to eat but the roots of grass, which would not keep him alive very long. As soon, then, as he got down out of the tree, he set off towards the castle, without so much as telling his companions that he had seen it at all. Perhaps the hunger and want they had suffered had changed their nature so much that the one did not care what became of the other, if he could save himself. He travelled on most of the day, so that it was quite late when he reached the castle, and to his great disappointment found nothing but closed doors and no smoke rising from the chimneys. He thought there was nothing for it but to die after all, and had lain down beside the wall when he heard a window being opened high above him. At this he looked up and saw the most beautiful woman he had ever set eyes on. "Oh, it is Fortune that has sent you to me," he said. "It is indeed," said she. "What are you in need of, or what has sent you here?" "Necessity," said he. "I am dying for want of food and drink." "Come inside then," she said. "There is plenty of both here." Accordingly, he went in to where she was, and she opened a large room for him, where he saw a number of men lying asleep. She then set food before him, and after that showed him to the room where the others were. He lay down on one of the beds and fell sound asleep. And now we must go back to the two that he left behind him in the wood. When nightfall and the time of the wild beasts came upon these, the Englishman happened to climb up into the very same tree on which the Scotsman was when he got a sight of the castle. And as soon as the day began to dawn, and the Englishman looked to the four quarters of heaven, what did he see but the castle too? Off he went without saying a word to the Irishman, and everything happened to him just as it had done to the Scotsman. The poor Irishman was now left all alone, and did not know where the others had gone to, so he just stayed where he was, very sad and miserable. When night came, he climbed up into the same tree as the Englishman had been on the night before. As soon as day came, he also saw the castle, and set out towards it. But when he reached it, he could see no signs of fire or living being about it. Before long, however, he heard the window opened above his head, looked up, and beheld the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He asked if she would give him food and drink, and she answered kindly and heartily that she would if he would only come inside. This he did very willingly, and she set before him food and drink that he had never seen the like of before. In the room there was a bed, with diamond rings hanging at every loop of the curtains, and everything that was in the room besides astonished him so much that he actually forgot that he was hungry. When she saw that he was not eating at all, she asked him what he wanted yet, to which he replied that he would neither eat nor drink until he knew who she was, or where she came from, or who had put her there. "I shall tell you that," said she. "I am an enchanted princess, and my father has promised that the man who releases me from the spell shall have the third of his kingdom while he is alive, and the whole of it after he is dead, and marry me as well. If ever I saw a man who looked likely to do this, you are the one. I have been here for 16 years now, and no one who ever came to the castle has asked me who I was, except yourself. Every other man that has come, so long as I have been here, lies asleep in the big room down there." "Tell me then," said the Irishman, "what is the spell that has been laid on you, and how you can be freed from it." "There is a little room there," said the princess, "and if I could get a man to stay in it from 10 o'clock to midnight for 3 nights on end, I should be freed from the spell. I am the man." "For you, then," said he, "I will take on hand to do it." Thereupon she brought him a pipe and tobacco, and he went into the room. But before long he heard a hammering and knocking on the outside of the door, and was told to open it. "I won't," he said. The next moment the door came flying in, and those outside along with it. They knocked him down and kicked him, and knelt on his body till it came to midnight. But as soon as the cock crew, they all disappeared. The Irishman was little more than alive by this time. As soon as daylight appeared, the princess came, and found him lying full length on the floor, unable to speak a word. She took a bottle, rubbed him from head to foot with something from it, and thereupon he was as sound as ever. But after what he had got that night, he was very unwilling to try it a second time. The princess, however, entreated him to stay, saying that the next night would not be so bad, and in the end he gave in and stayed. When it was getting near midnight, he heard them ordering him to open the door, and there were 3 of them for everyone that there had been the previous evening. He did not make the slightest movement to go out to them or to open the door, but before long they broke it up and were in on top of him. They laid hold of him and kept throwing him between them up to the ceiling or jumping above him until the cock crew, when they all disappeared. When day came, the princess went to the room to see if he was still alive, and taking the bottle put it to his nostrils, which soon brought him to himself. The first thing he said then was that he was a fool to go on getting himself killed for anyone he ever saw, and was determined to be off and stay there no longer. When the princess learned his intention, she entreated him to stay, reminding him that another night would free her from the spell. "Besides," she said, "if there is a single spark of life in you when the day comes, the stuff that is in this bottle will make you as sound as ever you were." With all this, the Irishman decided to stay, but that night there were 3 at him for every one that was there the 2 nights before, and it looked very unlikely that he would be alive in the morning after all that he got. When morning dawned, and the princess came to see if he was still alive, she found him lying on the floor, as if dead. She tried to see if there was breath in him, but could not quite make it out. Then she put her hand on his pulse and found a faint movement in it. Accordingly, she poured what was in the bottle on him, and before long he rose up on his feet and was as well as ever he was. So that business was finished, and the princess was freed from the spell. The princess then told the Irishman that she must go away for the present, but would return for him in a few days in a carriage drawn by 4 grey horses. He told her to be easy and not speak like that to him. "I have paid dear for you for the last 3 nights," he said. "If I have to part with you now—" But in the twinkling of an eye she had disappeared. He did not know what to do with himself when he saw that she was gone. But before she went, she had given him a little rod with which he could, when he pleased, waken the men who had been sleeping there, some of them for 16 years. After being thus left alone, he went in and stretched himself on 3 chairs that were in the room, when what does he see coming in at the door but a little fair-haired lad? "Where did you come from, my lad?" said the Irishman. "I came to make ready your food for you," said he. "Who told you to do that?" said the Irishman. "My mistress," answered the lad, "the princess that was under the spell and is now free." By this the Irishman knew that she had sent the lad to wait on him. The lad also told him that his mistress wished him to be ready next morning at 9 o'clock, when she would come for him with the carriage, as she had promised. He was greatly pleased at this, and next morning, when the time was drawing near, went out into the garden. But the little fair-haired lad took a big pin out of his pocket and stuck it into the back of the Irishman's coat without his noticing it, whereupon he fell sound asleep. Before long the princess came with the carriage and 4 horses, and asked the lad whether his master was awake. He said that he wasn't. "It is bad for him," said she, "when the night is not long enough for him to sleep. Tell him that if he doesn't meet me at this time tomorrow, it is not likely that he will ever see me again all his life." As soon as she was gone, the lad took the pin out of his master's coat, who instantly awoke. The first word he said to the lad was, "Have you seen her?" "Yes," said he, "and she bade me tell you that if you don't meet her at 9 o'clock tomorrow, you will never see her again." He was very sorry when he heard this, and could not understand why the sleep should have fallen upon him just when she was coming. He decided, however, to go early to bed that night, in order to rise in time next morning, and so he did. When it was getting near 9 o'clock, he went out to the garden to wait till she came, and the fair-haired lad along with him. But as soon as the lad got the chance, he stuck the pin into his master's coat again, and he fell asleep as before. Precisely at 9 o'clock, came the princess in the carriage with 4 horses, and asked the lad if his master had got up yet. But he said, no, he was asleep, just as he was the day before. Dear, dear, said the princess, I am sorry for him. Was the sleep he had last night not enough for him? Tell him that he will never see me here again, and here is a sword that you will give him in my name, and my blessing along with it. With this she went off, and as soon as she had gone, the lad took the pin out of his master's coat. He awoke instantly, and the first word he said was, Have you seen her? The lad said that he had, and there was the sword she had left for him. The Irishman was ready to kill the lad out of sheer vexation, but when he gave a glance over his shoulder, not a trace of the fair-haired lad was left. Being thus left all alone, he thought of going into the room where all the men were lying asleep, and there among the rest he found his 2 comrades who had deserted along with him. Then he remembered what the princess had told him, that he had only to touch them with the rod she had given him, and they would all awake, and the first he touched were his own comrades. They started to their feet at once, and he gave them as much silver and gold as they could carry when they went away. There was plenty to do before he got all the others wakened, for the 2 doors of the castle were crowded with them all the day long. The loss of the princess, however, kept rankling in his mind day and night, till finally he thought he would go about the world to see if he could find anyone to give him news of her. So he took the best horse in the stable and set out. 3 years he spent travelling through forests and wildernesses, but could find no one able to tell him anything of the princess. At last he fell into so great despair that he thought he would put an end to his own life, and for this purpose laid hold of the sword that she had given him by the hands of the fair-haired lad. But on drawing it from its sheath, he noticed that there was some writing on one side of the blade. He looked at this and read there, You will find me in the Blue Mountains. This made him take heart again, and he gave up the idea of killing himself, thinking that he would go on in hope of meeting someone who could tell him where the Blue Mountains were. After he had gone a long way without thinking where he was going, he saw at last a light far away, and made straight for it. On reaching it, he found it came from a little house, and as soon as the man inside heard the noise of the horse's feet, he came out to see who was there. Seeing a stranger on horseback, he asked what brought him there and where he was going. I have lived here, said he, for 300 years, and all that time I have not seen a single human being but yourself. I have been going about for the last 3 years, said the Irishman, to see if I could find anyone who can tell me where the Blue Mountains are. Come in, said the old man, and stay with me all night. I have a book which contains the history of the world, which I shall go through tonight, and if there is such a place as the Blue Mountains in it, we shall find it out. The Irishman stayed there all night, and as soon as morning came, rose to go. The old man said he had not gone to sleep all night for going through the book, but there was not a word about the Blue Mountains in it. But I'll tell you what, he said, if there is such a place on earth at all, I have a brother who lives 900 miles from here, and he is sure to know where they are, if anyone in this world does. The Irishman answered that he could never go these 900 miles, for his horse was giving in already. That doesn't matter, said the old man. I can do better than that. I have only to blow my whistle, and you will be at my brother's house before nightfall. So he blew the whistle, and the Irishman did not know where on earth he was, until he found himself at the other old man's door, who also told him that it was 300 years since he had seen anyone, and asked him where he was going. I am going to see if I can find anyone that can tell me where the Blue Mountains are, he said. "If you will stay with me tonight," said the old man, "I have a book of the history of the world, and I shall know where they are before daylight, if there is such a place in it at all." He stayed there all night, but there was not a word in the book about the Blue Mountains. Seeing that he was rather cast down, the old man told him that he had a brother 900 miles away, and that if information could be got about them from anyone, it would be from him. "And I will enable you," he said, "to reach the place where he lives before night." So he blew his whistle, and the Irishman landed at the brother's house before nightfall. When the old man saw him, he said he had not seen a single man for 300 years, and was very much surprised to see anyone come to him now. "Where are you going to?" he said. "I am going about asking for the Blue Mountains," said the Irishman. "The Blue Mountains," said the old man. "Yes," said the Irishman. "I never heard the name before, but if they do exist, I shall find them out. I am master of all the birds in the world, and have only to blow my whistle, and everyone will come to me. I shall then ask each of them to tell where it came from, and if there is any way of finding out the Blue Mountains, that is it." So he blew his whistle, and when he blew it, then all the birds of the world began to gather. The old man questioned each of them as to where they had come from, but there was not one of them that had come from the Blue Mountains. After he had run over them all, however, he missed a big eagle that was wanting, and wondered that it had not come. Soon afterwards he saw something big coming towards him, darkening the sky. It kept coming nearer and growing bigger. And what was this, after all, but the eagle? When she arrived, the old man scolded her and asked what had kept her so long behind. "I couldn't help it," she said. "I had more than 20 times further to come than any bird that has come here today." "Where have you come from, then?" said the old man. "From the Blue Mountains," said she. "Indeed," said the old man, "and what are they doing there?" "They are making ready this very day," said the eagle, "for the marriage of the daughter of the King of the Blue Mountains. For 3 years now she has refused to marry anyone whatsoever, until she should give up all hope of the coming of the man who released her from the spell. Now she can wait no longer. For 3 years is the time that she agreed with her father to remain without marrying." The Irishman knew that it was for himself she had been waiting so long, but he was unable to make any better of it, for he had no hope of reaching the Blue Mountains all his life. The old man noticed how sad he grew, and asked the eagle what she would take for carrying this man on her back to the Blue Mountains. "I must have 60 cattle killed," said she, "and cut up into quarters. And every time I look over my shoulder, he must throw one of them into my mouth." As soon as the Irishman and the old man heard her demand, they went out, hunting. And before evening they had killed 60 cattle. They made quarters of them, as the eagle told them, and then the old man asked her to lie down, till they would get it all heaped up on her back. First of all, though, they had to get a ladder of 14 steps, to enable them to get on to the eagle's back, and there they piled up the meat as well as they could. Then the old man told the Irishman to mount, and to remember to throw a quarter of beef to her every time she looked round. He went up, and the old man gave the eagle the word to be off, which she instantly obeyed, and every time she turned her head, the Irishman threw a quarter of beef into her mouth. As they came near the borders of the kingdom of the Blue Mountains, however, the beef was done. And when the eagle looked over her shoulder, what was the Irishman at but throwing the stone between her tail and her neck? At this she turned a complete somersault and threw the Irishman off into the sea, where he fell into the bay that was right in front of the king's palace. Fortunately, the points of his toes just touched the bottom, and he managed to get ashore. When he went up into the town, all the streets were gleaming with light, and the wedding of the princess was just about to begin. He went into the first house he came to, and this happened to be the house of the king's hen wife. He asked the old woman what was causing all the noise and light in the town. "The princess," said she, "is going to be married tonight against her will, for she has been expecting every day that the man who freed her from the spell would come." "There is a guinea for you," said he. "Go and bring her here." The old woman went, and soon returned along with the princess. She and the Irishman recognized each other and were married, and had a great wedding that lasted for a year and a day. The Broken Promise. Once upon a time, an Indian hunter built himself a house in the middle of a great forest, far away from all his tribe, for his heart was gentle and kind, and he was weary of the treachery and cruel deeds of those who had been his friends. So he left them, and took his wife and 3 children, and they journeyed on until they found a spot near to a clear stream, where they began to cut down trees and to make ready their wigwam. For many years they lived peacefully and happily in this sheltered place, never leaving it except to hunt the wild animals, which served them both for food and clothes. At last, however, the strong man felt sick, and before long he knew he must die. So he gathered his family round him and said his last words to them. "You, my wife, the companion of my days, will follow me ere many moons have waned to the island of the blessed. But for you, O my children, whose lives are but newly begun, the wickedness, unkindness, and ingratitude from which I fled are before you. Yet I shall go hence in peace, my children, if you will promise always to love each other, and never to forsake your youngest brother." "Never," they replied, holding out their hands. And the hunter died content. Scarcely 8 moons had passed when, just as he had said, the wife went forth and followed her husband. But before leaving her children, she bade the 2 elder ones think of their promise never to forsake the younger, for he was a child and weak. And while the snow lay thick upon the ground, they tended him and cherished him. But when the earth showed green again, the heart of the young man stirred within him, and he longed to see the wigwams of the village where his father's youth was spent. Therefore he opened all his heart to his sister, who answered, "My brother, I understand your longing for our fellow men, whom here we cannot see. But remember our father's words. Shall we not seek our own pleasures, and forget the little one?" But he would not listen, and, making no reply, he took his bow and arrows and left the hut. The snows fell and melted, yet he never returned, and at last the heart of the girl grew cold and hard, and her little boy became a burden in her eyes, till one day she spoke thus to him, "See, there is food for many days to come. Stay here within the shelter of the hut. I go to seek our brother, and when I have found him, I shall return hither." But when, after hard journeying, she reached the village where her brother dwelt, and saw that he had a wife and was happy, and when she too was sought by a young brave, then she also forgot the boy alone in the forest, and thought only of her husband. Now, as soon as the little boy had eaten all the food which his sister had left him, he went out into the woods, and gathered berries and dug up roots, and while the sun shone he was contented and had his fill. But when the snows began and the wind howled, then his stomach felt empty and his limbs cold, and he hid in trees all the night, and only crept out to eat what the wolves had left behind. And by, having no other friends, he sought their company, and sat by while they devoured their prey, and they grew to know him, and gave him food. And without them he would have died in the snow. But at last the snows melted, and the ice upon the great lake, and as the wolves went down to the shore, The boy went after them, and it happened one day that his big brother was fishing in his canoe near the shore, and he heard the voice of a child singing in the Indian tone. My brother, I am becoming a wolf. I am becoming a wolf. And when he had so sung, he howled as wolves howl. Then the heart of the elder sunk, and he hastened towards him, crying, Brother, little brother, come to me. But he, being half a wolf, only continued his song. And the louder the elder called him, Brother, little brother, come to me, the swifter he fled after his brothers, the wolves, and the heavier grew his skin, till, with a long howl, he vanished into the depths of the forest. So, with shame and anguish in his soul, the elder brother went back to his village, and, with his sister, mourned the little boy and the broken promise till the end of his life. The Cat and the Mouse in Partnership. A cat had made acquaintance with a mouse, and had spoken so much of the great love and friendship she felt for her, that at last the mouse consented to live in the same house with her, and to go shares in the housekeeping. But we must provide for the winter, or else we shall suffer hunger, said the cat. You, little mouse, cannot venture everywhere in case you run at last into a trap. This good counsel was followed, and a little pot of fat was bought, but they did not know where to put it. At length, after long consultation, the cat said, I know of no place where it could be better put than in the church. No one will trouble to take it away from there. We will hide it in a corner, and we won't touch it till we are in want. So the little pot was placed in safety, but it was not long before the cat had a great longing for it, and said to the mouse, I wanted to tell you, little mouse, that my cousin has a little son, white with brown spots, and she wants me to be godmother to it. Let me go out today, and do you take care of the house alone? Yes, go certainly, replied the mouse, and when you eat anything good, think of me. I should very much like a drop of the red christening wine. But it was all untrue. The cat had no cousin, and had not been asked to be godmother. She went straight to the church, slunk to the little pot of fat, began to lick it, and licked the top off. Then she took a walk on the roofs of the town, looked at the view, stretched herself out in the sun, and licked her lips whenever she thought of the little pot of fat. As soon as it was evening, she went home again. Ah, here you are again, said the mouse. You must certainly have had an enjoyable day. It went off very well, answered the cat. What was the child's name? Asked the mouse. Top off, said the cat dryly. Top off, echoed the mouse. It is indeed a wonderful and curious name. Is it in your family? What is there odd about it? Said the cat. It is not worse than bread thief, as your godchild is called. Not long after this, another great longing came over the cat. She said to the mouse, You must again be kind enough to look after the house alone, for I have been asked a second time to stand godmother, and as this child has a white ring round its neck, I cannot refuse. The kind mouse agreed, but the cat slunk under the town wall to the church, and ate up half of the pot of fat. Nothing tastes better, said she, than what one eats by oneself, and she was very much pleased with her day's work. When she came home, the mouse asked, What was this child called? Half gone, answered the cat. Half gone? What a name! I have never heard it in my life. I don't believe it is in the calendar. Soon the cat's mouth began to water once more after her licking business. All good things in threes, she said to the mouse. I have again to stand godmother. The child is quite black and has very white paws, but not a single white hair on its body. This only happens once in 2 years. So you will let me go out? Top off, "Half gone," repeated the mouse. "They are such curious names, they make me very thoughtful." "Oh, you sit at home in your dark grey coat and your long tail," said the cat, "and you get fanciful. That comes of not going out in the day." The mouse had a good cleaning out while the cat was gone, and made the house tidy, but the greedy cat ate the fat every bit up. "When it is all gone, one can be at rest," she said to herself, and at night she came home sleek and satisfied. The mouse asked at once after the third child's name. "It won't please you any better," said the cat. He was called Clean Gone. "Clean Gone," repeated the mouse. "I do not believe that name has been printed any more than the others. Clean Gone. What can it mean?" She shook her head, curled herself up, and went to sleep. From this time on, no one asked the cat to stand godmother, but when the winter came and there was nothing to be got outside, the mouse remembered their provision and said, "Come, cat, we will go to our pot of fat which we have stored away. It will taste very good." "Yes, indeed," answered the cat. "It will taste as good to you as if you stretched your thin tongue out of the window." They started off, and when they reached it, they found the pot in its place, but quite empty. "Ah," said the mouse, "now I know what has happened. It has all come out. You are a true friend to me. You have eaten it all when you stood godmother. First the top off, then half of it gone. Then—" "Will you be quiet?" screamed the cat. "Another word and I will eat you up." "Clean gone" was already on the poor mouse's tongue, and scarcely was it out than the cat made a spring at her, seized and swallowed her. You see, that is the way of the world. The Crow. Once upon a time there were 3 princesses who were all 3 young and beautiful, but the youngest, although she was not fairer than the other 2, was the most lovable of them all. About half a mile from the palace in which they lived there stood a castle, which was uninhabited and almost a ruin, but the garden which surrounded it was a mass of blooming flowers, and in this garden the youngest princess used often to walk. One day, when she was pacing to and fro under the lime trees, a black crow hopped out of a rose bush in front of her. The poor beast was all torn and bleeding, and the kind little princess was quite unhappy about it. When the crow saw this, it turned to her and said, "I am not really a black crow, but an enchanted prince who has been doomed to spend his youth in misery. If you only liked, princess, you could save me. But you would have to say goodbye to all your own people and come and be my constant companion in this ruined castle. There is one habitable room in it, in which there is a golden bed. There you will have to live all by yourself. And don't forget that whatever you may see or hear in the night, you must not scream out, for if you give as much as a single cry, my sufferings will be doubled." The good-natured princess at once left her home and her family and hurried to the ruined castle and took possession of the room with the golden bed. When night approached, she lay down, but though she shut her eyes tight, sleep would not come. At midnight, she heard to her great horror someone coming along the passage, and in a minute her door was flung wide open and a troop of strange beings entered the room. They at once proceeded to light a fire in the huge fireplace. Then they placed a great cauldron of boiling water on it. When they had done this, they approached the bed on which the trembling girl lay, and, screaming and yelling all the time, they dragged her towards the cauldron. She nearly died with fright, but she never uttered a sound. Then, of a sudden, the cock crew, and all the evil spirits vanished. At the same moment the crow appeared and hopped all round the room with joy. It thanked the princess most heartily for her goodness, and said that its sufferings had already been greatly lessened. Now one of the princess's elder sisters, who was very inquisitive, had found out about everything, and went to pay her youngest sister a visit in the ruined castle. She implored her so urgently to let her spend the night with her in the golden bed, that at last the good-natured little princess consented. But at midnight, when the odd folk appeared, the elder sister screamed with terror, and from this time on, the youngest princess insisted always on keeping watch alone. So she lived in solitude all the daytime, and at night she would have been frightened, had she not been so brave. But every day the crow came and thanked her for her endurance, and assured her that his sufferings were far less than they had been. And so 2 years passed away, when one day the crow came to the princess and said, "In another year I shall be freed from the spell I am under at present, because then the 7 years will be over. But before I can resume my natural form and take possession of the belongings of my forefathers, you must go out into the world and take service as a maidservant." The young princess consented at once, and for a whole year she served as a maid, but in spite of her youth and beauty, she was very badly treated and suffered many things. One evening, when she was spinning flax and had worked her little white hands weary, she heard a rustling beside her and a cry of joy. Then she saw a handsome youth standing beside her, who knelt down at her feet and kissed the little weary white hands. "I am the prince," he said, "who you in your goodness, when I was wandering about in the shape of a black crow, freed from the most awful torments. Come now to my castle with me, and let us live there happily together." So they went to the castle where they had both endured so much. But when they reached it, it was difficult to believe that it was the same, for it had all been rebuilt and done up again. And there they lived for 100 years, 100 years of joy and happiness. The Dead Wife. Once upon a time, there were a man and his wife who lived in the forest, very far from the rest of the tribe. Very often they spent the day in hunting together, but after a while the wife found that she had so many things to do that she was obliged to stay at home. So he went alone, though he found that when his wife was not with him, he never had any luck. One day, when he was away hunting, the woman fell ill, and in a few days she died. Her husband grieved bitterly and buried her in the house where she had passed her life, but as the time went on, he felt so lonely without her that he made a wooden doll about her height and size for company and dressed it in her clothes. He seated it in front of the fire and tried to think he had his wife back again. The next day he went out to hunt, and when he came home the first thing he did was to go up to the doll and brush off some of the ashes from the fire which had fallen on its face. But he was very busy now, for he had to cook and mend, besides getting food, for there was no one to help him. And so a whole year passed away. At the end of that time, he came back from hunting one night and found some wood by the door and a fire within. The next night there was not only wood and fire, but a piece of meat in the kettle, nearly ready for eating. He searched all about to see who could have done this, but could find no one. The next time he went to hunt, he took care not to go far, and came in quite early. And while he was still a long way off, he saw a woman going into the house with wood on her shoulders. So he made haste, and opened the door quickly, and instead of the wooden doll, his wife sat in front of the fire. Then she spoke to him and said, "The Great Spirit felt sorry for you, because you would not be comforted, so he let me come back to you. But you must not stretch out your hand to touch me till we have seen the rest of our people. If you do, I shall die." So the man listened to her words, and the woman dwelt there, and brought the wood and kindled the fire, till one day her husband said to her, It is now 2 years since you died. Let us now go back to our tribe. Then you will be well, and I can touch you." And with that he prepared food for the journey, a string of deer's flesh for her to carry, and one for himself. And so they started. Now the camp of the tribe was distant 6 days' journey, and when they were yet 1 day's journey off, it began to snow, and they felt weary and longed for rest. Therefore they made a fire, cooked some food, and spread out their skins to sleep. Then the heart of the man was greatly stirred, and he stretched out his arms to his wife. But she waved her hands and said, "We have seen no one yet. It is too soon." But he would not listen to her, and caught her to him, and behold, he was clasping the wooden doll. And when he saw it was the doll, he pushed it from him in his misery, and rushed away to the camp, and told them all his story. And some doubted, and they went back with him to the place where he and his wife had stopped to rest. And there lay the doll. And besides, they saw in the snow the steps of 2 people, and the foot of one was like the foot of the doll. And the man grieved sore all the days of his life.